The year was 2847, and humanity had been members of the Galactic Concord for nearly 300 years. They had joined the alliance of 12 spacefaring species with hope in their hearts and dreams of a future among the stars. They had contributed technology and culture and diplomatic efforts to the Great Alliance. They had helped build trade routes and settled disputes and shared their knowledge freely with all who asked. Yet despite everything they gave, humans remained outsiders. They were tolerated but never truly accepted. They were invited to meetings, but their voices were ignored. They were allowed to exist, but never allowed to belong. Admiral Catherine Moore stood on the observation deck of the starship Vigilance and watched Earth grow smaller through the viewport. The blue marble that had birthed humanity was shrinking into the darkness of space. Behind her, the holographic display flickered with the emergency broadcast from the Concord High Council. She had watched it 17 times already, but the words still burned like fire in her chest. By unanimous decision of the 11 remaining member species, humanity is hereby expelled from Galactic Concord territories. All human vessels and colonies and citizens must vacate Concord space within 90 standard days. Failure to comply will result in forcible removal. The charges had been fabricated from nothing. The Galaxy were an insectoid species with compound eyes and clicking mandibles and a hatred for humanity that stretched back generations. They had never forgiven humans for expanding faster than their own colonies. They had never accepted that a species so young could achieve so much so quickly. And so they had orchestrated a campaign of lies and misinformation that spread through the Concord like poison. They claimed humans had violated the sacred accords by developing weapons capable of destroying entire star systems. They presented evidence that had been manufactured in their own laboratories. They brought forward witnesses who had been bribed or threatened into cooperation. The other species did not investigate these claims. They did not ask for proof. They simply voted, and the vote was unanimous. Catherine knew the truth. The other species had been looking for an excuse to remove humanity for decades. Humans were too ambitious. Humans were too creative. Humans asked too many questions and challenged too many traditions. The Veluxy had simply given them the excuse they needed. Commander Lucas Gray approached Catherine with heavy footsteps. His face was grim, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. He had been coordinating evacuation efforts for 3 days straight, and the exhaustion showed in every line of his face. Admiral, we have received word from the outer colonies. The Karathi fleet is already moving to enforce the evacuation. They are not waiting for the deadline. Catherine turned away from the viewport. The Karathi were massive beings with rock-like skin and a reputation for brutality. They had always resented humans for settling worlds they considered their own. How many of our people are still planetside? She asked. Nearly 8 billion across 17 worlds. We do not have enough ships to evacuate everyone in time. Even if we commandeer every civilian vessel, we will still fall short by millions. Catherine closed her eyes and remembered the warnings her predecessors had given the Council decades ago. Admiral James Porter had stood before the assembled ambassadors and told them that humanity needed to prepare for threats beyond the known galaxy. He had warned them that peace was temporary and that danger lurked in the darkness between stars. They had laughed at him. They had called him paranoid and fearful and primitive, but humanity had listened to Admiral Porter, even if the Concord had not. They had built hidden shipyards in remote systems. They had stockpiled resources in secret locations. They had developed technologies they never shared with their allies. They had hoped these preparations would never be needed. They had been wrong. Initiate Protocol Exodus, Catherine said quietly. Contact every hidden facility and activate every reserve fleet. We are leaving and we are taking everyone with us. Lucas nodded and turned to relay the orders. Then he paused and looked back at her. What about the Council? Should we send a response to their decree? Catherine considered this for a long moment. She thought about all the years humanity had spent trying to earn acceptance. She thought about the scientists who had shared their discoveries freely. She thought about the diplomats who had worked tirelessly for peace. She thought about the soldiers who had died defending Concord worlds from pirates and raiders. All of it had meant nothing in the end. Yes, she said finally. Send them a message. Make sure every species receives it. The message was broadcast on all frequencies across every Concord world. It was brief, and it was calm, and it carried a weight that most who heard it did not understand. We warned you. We hoped for peace. You have chosen this path. Remember that when the darkness comes, the Concord species laughed when they received the message. Ambassador Trellix of the Veloxy displayed it at a celebration feast and mocked it before a crowd of thousands. What could the exiled humans possibly do? They are being cast out into the uncharted regions beyond map space. The outer reach was a wasteland of dead stars and radiation storms and gravitational anomalies that tore ships apart. No civilization had ever survived there. No species had ever returned from those depths. The humans would die slowly in the darkness. Their children would never know the warmth of a stable sun. Their culture would fade into nothing, and their names would be forgotten. This was the fate the Concord had chosen for them, and the Concord felt no shame in that choice. On the observation deck of the Vigilance, Catherine watched as the last human transports departed from Earth. Millions of people were leaving the only home their species had ever known. They were carrying whatever they could bring and leaving behind everything else. They were afraid and angry and heartbroken. But they were also determined. Catherine had seen that. Determination in the eyes of every human she passed. They would not simply die in the outer reach. They would not fade into nothing. They would survive because that was what humans did. They had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed them. They had climbed out of every hole they had ever fallen into. They would climb out of this one too. The Veloxy and the Karathi and all the other species did not understand what they had done. They thought they were removing a nuisance. They thought they were eliminating a threat. They did not realize they were planting a seed in hostile soil, and that seed would grow into something they could not imagine. Catherine turned away from the viewport as Earth finally disappeared from view. She had a fleet to command and a species to save. The Concord had made their choice, and humanity had made theirs. They would survive. They would grow. They would remember, and one day the Concord would understand exactly what they had unleashed upon themselves. 50 years passed, and the galaxy moved on without humanity. The Concord species continued their lives as if nothing had changed. They traded goods and signed treaties and expanded their territories into the spaces humans had once occupied. They built new colonies on worlds that still held the ruins of human cities. They erased human names from star maps and replaced them with their own. They worked very hard to forget that humanity had ever existed at all. Ambassador Trellix of the Veloxy had grown old and powerful in those 50 years. The architect of humanity's exile had been rewarded with wealth and status and influence. Trellix now controlled the largest voting bloc in the Concord Council and used that power to shape the alliance according to Veloxy interests. The other species resented this, but they said nothing. They had all benefited from the exile in their own ways, and none of them wanted to admit what they had done. The annual Concord Summit was held on the great station at the center of known space. Thousands of diplomats and merchants and officials gathered to celebrate another year of peace and prosperity. Ambassador Trellix addressed the assembly with pride swelling in every word. We have entered a golden age. The removal of the human contamination has allowed our civilizations to flourish without their disruptive influence. Our economies grow stronger every year. Our technologies advance without interference. Our children are born into a galaxy free from human ambition and human aggression. Assembled delegates clicked their mandibles, or flashed their chromatophores, or rumbled their approval in whatever way their species expressed agreement. They had all accepted the official story. Humans had been dangerous and unpredictable, and their removal had been necessary for the greater good. Only one voice did not join the celebration. Ambassador Kyril of the Netherin sat in silence at the edge of the great hall. The Netherin were a tall and slender species with pale skin and large dark eyes that seemed to see more than other beings could perceive. They had always been the quietest members of the Concord. They watched and listened and remembered things that others chose to forget. When the applause faded, Kyril rose to speak. The hall fell silent because the Netheran rarely spoke, and when they did, it was usually important. "Has anyone heard from the humans?" Kyrell asked in a soft voice that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "In 50 years, not a single transmission has emerged from the outer reach. Not one distress signal. Not one refugee ship. Not one piece of debris." Trellix's antennae twitched with irritation. "They are dead, Ambassador Kyrell. The outer reach is a wasteland of dead stars and radiation storms. No species could survive there." "We all know this, do we?" Kyrell asked. "We assumed they would die. We hoped they would die. But did anyone actually confirm their deaths? Did anyone send a probe or a scout ship to verify what happened to 8 billion people?" The hall was silent. No one had checked. No one had wanted to check. "The humans were resourceful," Kyrell continued. "They survived conditions that would have killed any of our species. They adapted to environments we could not tolerate. They solved problems we could not understand. Perhaps we should send a reconnaissance mission to determine their fate." Trellix rose from the Veluxy delegation with fury burning in compound eyes. "You would waste Concord resources searching for ghosts? The humans are dead, Ambassador. Let them stay dead. I move that this suggestion be rejected." The vote was swift, and the result was predictable. The Concord had no interest in wasting resources on extinct creatures. The matter was closed, and the celebration continued, and Ambassador Kyrell sat back down in silence. But Kyrell remembered something the other ambassadors had forgotten. Before the exile, Kyrell had spent time among humans as part of a cultural exchange program. They had lived in human cities and eaten human food and learned human history. They had studied the species that everyone else dismissed as primitive and aggressive. And Kyrell had learned one crucial thing about humanity. They did not simply survive adversity. They were transformed by it. Every disaster in human history had made them stronger. Every setback had pushed them to grow. Every enemy that tried to destroy them had only succeeded in forging them into something more dangerous. The Concord had not killed humanity by casting them into the outer reach. They had simply given them a reason to evolve, meanwhile in a region of space so hostile that no Concord vessel had ever penetrated. Humanity was doing exactly that. The outer reach was everything the Concord had feared and worse. Radiation storms swept through entire star systems. Gravitational anomalies crushed ships without warning. Resources were scarce, and dangers were everywhere, but humans had faced worse. They had survived ice ages with nothing but animal skins and stone tools. They had crossed oceans in wooden boats. They had walked on their moon before most Concord species had discovered fire. The outer reach was hostile, but it was not. Impo Sissik, Dr. Nina Lawson stood before the unified human council on the artificial world they had named Haven. She was the granddaughter of refugees who had fled Earth during the exile. She had never seen a blue sky or breathed unfiltered air. She had grown up in the darkness between stars, and she had dedicated her life to ensuring humanity would never be vulnerable again behind her holographic displays showed the results of 5 decades of desperate innovation. Ships that could survive radiation storms, habitats that could extract resources from dead worlds, weapons that operated on principles the Concord had never conceived, medical technology that had extended human lifespans by centuries. "We have developed technologies the Concord cannot imagine," she reported to the assembled leaders. "Our faster-than-light systems leave no detectable signature. Our sensors can observe Concord space without being detected. Our weapons could destroy their largest battle stations with a single strike." Council leader Samuel Hart studied the data with careful eyes. His grandfather had been among the original exiles, and the stories of humiliation still burned in his family's memory. But Samuel was not interested in revenge. He was interested in survival and our population. He asked, "We are now 32 billion strong across 247 worlds. Our growth rate exceeds anything in Concord history. We have adapted to environments they consider uninhabitable." Samuel nodded slowly. Humanity had not merely survived the exile. They had thrived in ways their enemies could never have predicted. What about the Concord? Do they know we exist? Nina shook her head. They believe we are extinct. They have not thought of us in decades. Our stealth technology ensures they will not detect us unless we choose to reveal ourselves. Samuel considered this for a long moment. Part of him wanted to return to Concord space immediately. Part of him wanted to show Trellix and all the others exactly what their cruelty had created, but he was wise enough to know that revenge was a luxury humanity could not yet afford. "And we continue to watch," he said finally. "We continue to prepare, and we remain silent. The Concord cast us out because they feared what we might become. Let them forget that fear. Let them grow complacent and weak, and when the time comes, we will remind them why they should have been afraid." The council agreed. Humanity would wait in the darkness. They would grow stronger with every passing year. They would watch their former allies from the shadows, and they would remain silent until the galaxy gave them a reason to speak. Another century passed, and then another. 200 years had now gone by since. The exile in humanity had become something the Concord could not have imagined in their darkest nightmares. They had spread across the outer reach like a tide of silent determination. They had built cities on worlds that should have been impossible to inhabit. They had raised children who had never known the sting of rejection and taught them to be strong and patient and ready. The Galactic Concord had changed as well, but not for the better. Peace had made them soft, and comfort had made them careless. Their military fleets had shrunk to a fraction of their former size because there were no threats to defend against. Their weapons technology had stagnated because there was no enemy to fight. Their early warning systems had fallen into disrepair because no one believed danger would ever come. Ambassador Trellix had died long ago and been replaced by younger Luxie, who had never known humans at all. The exile was ancient history now. It was taught in schools as a cautionary tale about a dangerous species that had overreached and been rightfully punished. Children learned that humans had been aggressive and unpredictable, and that the Concord had been wise to remove them. No one questioned this version of events because no one remembered the truth. Lieutenant Hannah Cole piloted her stealth vessel through Concord space on a routine reconnaissance mission. Her ship was called the Whisper, and it was invisible to every sensor the Concord possessed. She could fly through the heart of their most secure installations, and they would never know she had been there. Hannah had been. Born in the outer reach on a world called New Dawn, her parents had been born there as well, and their parents before them. Earth was a legend to her. It was a distant memory preserved in historical archives and taught in schools, but it was not home. Home was the vast network of human worlds that stretched across the darkness. Home was the silent empire that watched and waited and prepared. She was 32 years old, but she looked barely 20. Human medical technology had advanced far beyond anything the Concord possessed. Humans now lived for 3 or 4 centuries and remained healthy and strong throughout those long lives. They had more time to learn and grow and plan. Hannah guided her ship through a busy trade lane, where Concord vessels moved back and forth like fish in a stream. None of them detected her presence. None of them suspected that human eyes were watching their every move. "Control, this is Whisper 7, she reported through a quantum-encrypted channel that could not be intercepted. "I am completing my survey of Sector 4. Nothing unusual to report. The Korathi have reduced their border patrols again. Their fleet strength is down 12% from last year." Calm voice responded from across the vast distance. "Understood, Whisper 7. Continue to Sector 77 Alpha and complete standard observation protocols." Hannah adjusted her course and engaged her silent drive. The ship moved without a whisper of energy that could be detected. She settled into her seat and watched the stars drift past her viewport. This was her life, and she was proud of it. Every mission she flew brought humanity one step closer to being ready. She was halfway to her destination when her sensors detected something strange. It was faint at first, just a flicker at the edge of her instruments. But Hannah had been trained to notice things that others might dismiss, and she did not dismiss this. "Control, I am picking up something unusual," she reported. "There is a disturbance at the edge of Concord space. Sector 77 Alpha. I am reading massive energy signatures." Nothing in our database matches this profile. There was a long pause before the response came. When it did, the voice had lost its calm tone. See it to whisper 7. Return to base immediately. Do not attempt to investigate. Repeat, do not attempt to investigate. Hana obeyed without question. She turned her ship toward home and pushed her engines to maximum safe speed. But before she entered the transit point that would carry her back to human space, she looked back at the readings one more time. Something was coming. Something massive. Something that made even her hardened heart feel a flicker of fear. Back on Haven, the Human Intelligence Council gathered in an emergency session. The chamber was deep underground and protected by layers of shielding that could withstand a direct strike from a warship. The men and women who sat around the curved table were the finest minds humanity had produced. They analyzed threats and planned responses, and ensured that humanity would never be caught unprepared. Director Marcus Webb stood at the head of the table with a grave expression on his weathered face. He had served in intelligence for over a century, and he had seen many threats come and go. But he had never seen anything like this. "What are we looking at?" he asked. Senior analyst Patricia Dunn enlarged the sensor readings on the main display. The image showed a region of space at the edge of the galaxy where something impossible was happening. "It is a fleet," she said, "but not like anything in our records. We are counting over 2,000 vessels emerging from intergalactic space. They are heading directly for Concord territory." Marcus studied the images with narrowed eyes. Origin: unknown. The design language does not match any known species. These ships were not built by anyone in this galaxy. They came from somewhere else. Somewhere very far away. And their capabilities? Patricia hesitated before answering. "Sir, look at the energy signatures. Each of those ships has more firepower than an entire Concord battle group. Their smallest vessels could destroy a Concord dreadnought without effort. Their largest vessels are the size of small moons." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what this meant. The Concord had no hope of defeating such a force. They reduced fleets and outdated. Weapons would be swept aside like dust in a storm. Marcus felt a chill run through him despite the warmth of the chamber. Humanity had always known this day might come. The galaxy was old, and countless civilizations had risen and fallen before the current species even existed. Some of those civilizations had left things behind. Dangerous things that slumbered in the darkness between galaxies and waited for reasons no one understood. "Do we have any information on their intentions?" he asked. Patricia shook her head. "No communications have been detected. They are not responding to Concord hails. They are simply moving forward in perfect formation. Based on their current trajectory, they will reach the first Concord worlds in approximately 3 months." Marcus turned to face the full council. These were the people who would decide humanity's response. These were the people who held the fate of 2 civilizations in their hands. "Begin full mobilization of all military assets. Silent deployment only. We do not want the Concord to know we exist until we decide to reveal ourselves." The orders went out across human space. Shipyards that had been building vessels in secret for 2 centuries began final preparations. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a war they hoped would never come received their deployment orders. Weapons that had never been fired in anger were loaded and armed. Humanity was preparing for war. The only question now was whether they would fight to save the Concord or simply watch their former oppressors. Bern Marcus stood alone at the viewport after the others had left. He looked out at the stars and thought about the choice that lay ahead. The Concord had cast humanity into darkness. They had tried to kill an entire species out of fear and jealousy. They deserved whatever fate was coming for them. But humanity had not survived 200 years in the outer reach by being cruel. They had survived by being better. And perhaps that meant being better than their enemies deserved. The storm was coming, and humanity would have to decide what kind of species they truly were. The Concord received no warning. Their sensors were too old and too poorly maintained to detect the approaching threat. Their intelligence networks had grown lazy after centuries of peace. Their leaders were too busy, arguing over trade disputes and territorial claims to notice that death was coming for them. All the alien fleet struck the first Concord world on a quiet morning when the sun was just rising over the capital city. The planet was called Valoria, and it was home to 3 billion Karathi. They had built great cities of stone and metal that stretched across the continents. They had families and children and dreams for the future. None of that mattered to the invaders. The first wave of attacks came without communication or demands or any attempt at negotiation. Massive beams of energy lanced down from orbit and vaporized entire cities in seconds. The Karathi defense fleet scrambled to respond, but their ships were destroyed before they could even fire a single shot. Within 6 hours, Valoria was dead. 3 billion lives erased as if they had never existed at all. Human intelligence had designated the invaders as harvesters because that seemed to be their purpose. They moved from world to world and stripped each one of all life. They did not take prisoners. They did not negotiate. They did not explain. They simply killed and moved on to the next target. The Concord Council met in emergency session as reports of destruction flooded in from across their territory. The great chamber that had once hosted celebrations of peace was now filled with terror and despair. Ambassadors who had spent their lives in comfortable diplomacy now faced the reality of extinction. Ambassador. Trellix IV stood before the assembly with panic in every twitch of Valusi antennae. The current Trellix was a descendant of the one who had orchestrated the human exile and had inherited both the family name and the family arrogance. But arrogance meant nothing against an enemy that could not be reasoned with. How is this possible? Trellix demanded. Where did they come from? Why did our sensors not detect them? Why did no one warn us? No one had answers. The Concord had dismantled most of their early warning systems decades ago. They had reduced their military budgets to fund social programs and luxury projects. They had convinced themselves that the galaxy was safe, and that no threat would ever challenge their dominance. They had been catastrophically wrong. Admiral Varath of the Netheran military presented the tactical situation with a calm voice that masked deep despair. We have lost contact with 17 worlds in the past month. Our combined fleets have engaged the enemy 43 times. We have not achieved a single victory. Their weapons operate on principles we do not understand. Their shields resist everything we throw at them. Their smallest ships can destroy our largest dreadnoughts. And what do we do? Another ambassador cried out, "How do we fight an enemy we cannot hurt?" Vorath had no answer. None of them did. The destruction continued week after week. The Veluxi homeworld fell, and billions of insectoid bodies burned in the flames. The Karathi lost world after world until only scattered refugee fleets remained. Species that had existed for millions of years were reduced to handfuls of survivors fleeing through space with nowhere to go. Ambassador? Chiral of the Netheran watched it all with ancient eyes. Chiral was very old now. The Netheran lived longer than most species, and Chiral had been present at the original vote to exile humanity. That memory had haunted Chiral for 2 centuries. Now it burned brighter than ever. The Netheran homeworld was gone. Chiral had watched it die from the viewport of an evacuation ship. Billions of Netheran had perished, including everyone Chiral had ever loved. Now only a few million remained scattered across refugee camps and borrowed stations. Chiral stood before the emergency council one final time. The great chamber was nearly empty now. Most of the ambassadors were dead or missing. Those who remained were hollow shells of the proud beings they had once been. "We made a terrible mistake," Chiral said with a voice heavy with grief and regret. 200 years ago, we cast out the only species that might have saved us. We exiled them because we feared their strength. We sent them to die in the darkness because we were jealous of their potential. And now we face extinction because of our cowardice. Trellix, the 4th hissed in response. The humans are dead. They died in the Outer Reach centuries ago. They cannot help us. No one can help us. Are they dead? Chiral asked. We never confirmed that. We assumed they would die because we wanted them to die. But did anyone ever check? Did anyone send a single probe to verify what happened to 8 billion people? Before anyone could respond, the council chamber's communication system activated without authorization. Every screen and every display flickered and changed to show a single image. A human face appeared before them. It was an older man with gray hair and steady eyes and a calm expression that spoke of absolute confidence. "This is Council Leader William Porter of the Unified Human Federation," the figure announced. "We have been watching." The surviving ambassadors stared in disbelief. Humans. Living humans. After 200 years of silence, they were still alive. William continued speaking. His voice carried the weight of centuries. 200 years ago, you expelled our ancestors from your space. You fabricated charges against us. You stole our homes and scattered our families. You believed we would die in the outer reach, and you did not care if we did. You ignored our warnings about preparing for threats beyond your borders. You called us paranoid. You called us warmongers. You laughed at our message and celebrated our exile, paused and let the silence stretch across the vast distance between them. We have survived. We have grown. We have built a civilization in the outer reach that dwarfs your concord in every measurable way. Our population numbers in the hundreds of billions. Our technology has advanced beyond anything you can comprehend. We have watched you for 2 centuries, and we have seen everything. Your arrogance. Your complacency. Your refusal to prepare for dangers you did not want to believe existed. Trellix found enough courage to speak. "You have come to gloat, then? You have come to watch us die and laugh at our suffering?" William shook his head slowly, and something like sadness crossed his features. "No, Ambassador. Despite everything you did to us, we have not come to watch you die. We have come to save you. Not because you deserve it. You do not deserve it. But because saving those who cannot save themselves is who we are. It is who we have always been." The display shifted to show a tactical map of Concord space. Across hundreds of systems, thousands of new signatures appeared. Human warships were decloaking simultaneously. They had been there all along, hidden in the shadows and watching and waiting. "Our fleets are engaging the harvesters now," William said. "We suggest you evacuate your remaining civilian populations to the coordinates we are transmitting. Our forces will provide cover. Stay out of the combat zones and let us do what we have spent 2 centuries preparing to do." The transmission ended. Kyrell looked around at the stunned faces of the surviving ambassadors. Some were weeping. Others sat frozen in shock. Trellix had collapsed into a chair with all arrogance drained away. "They came back," Kyrell whispered. "After everything we did to them, they came back to save us." Somewhere in the distance, the first human weapons began to fire, and the harvesters learned what it meant to face an enemy that had been forged in darkness. The war lasted 3 years, and it was the most terrible conflict the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human fleets met the harvesters across 1,000 battlefields in every corner of Concord space. The enemy was powerful beyond imagination, but humanity had spent 2 centuries preparing for exactly this kind of threat. They had developed weapons designed to kill gods. They had trained soldiers who could fight in any environment. They had built ships that could survive anything the universe threw at them. Commander Daniel Shaw led the assault on the Harvester forward fleet in the Karathi system. His ship was called the Resolute, and it was one of the finest vessels humanity had ever built. Around him flew 300 other warships crewed by men and women who had never known the Concord, but who fought to save it anyway. "All ships, this is Commander Shaw," he announced over the fleet channel. "The enemy has fortified positions around the 4th planet. Civilian evacuation is still ongoing on the surface. Our mission is to break their line and give those people time to escape. I will not lie to you. This will be hard. Some of us will not survive. But every minute we buy is another transport full of refugees who get to live. That is worth fighting for. That is worth dying for." The fleet surged forward and met the harvesters head-on. Human weapons blazed with energies that tore through alien shields. Human pilots flew with skill and courage that bordered on madness. Human soldiers boarded enemy vessels and fought hand in corridors that had never known the touch of oxygen. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Harvester forward fleet had been destroyed. 37 human ships had been lost, and over 12,000 men and women had given their lives. But the evacuation had succeeded. 8 million Karathi civilians had escaped to safety. Because humans had stood in the way of death and refused to move. This scene repeated itself across the galaxy. Humans died by the millions to protect species that had once cast them out. They fought in radiation storms and asteroid fields and the burning atmospheres of dying worlds. They never retreated. They never surrendered. They simply kept fighting until the enemy was destroyed or they themselves were dead. The final battle took place in a system with no name at the edge of known space. The Harvester command vessel waited there. It was a construct the size of a small moon that served as the brain of the entire invasion. Destroy it, and the remaining Harvester forces would fall into chaos. Fail, and the war would continue until nothing remained. Commander Daniel Shaw led the final assault. The Resolute had been repaired and rebuilt a dozen times over the course of the war. Scars covered her hull like medals of honor. Her crew had changed as losses mounted and replacements arrived, but her mission remained the same. "This is it," Daniel told his crew as they approached the massive construct. "Everything we have fought for comes down to this moment. Our ancestors were cast out into darkness and told to die. They refused. They survived. They built something incredible. And now we get to finish what they started. Not with revenge, not with hatred, but with the simple truth that humanity does not abandon those in need, even those who abandoned us." The Resolute pierced the command vessel's defenses alongside 100 other ships. They fought through layers of automated weapons and swarms of defender craft. They lost ship after ship, until only a handful remained. But they kept pushing forward because turning back was not something humans knew how to do. Daniel guided his ship into the heart of the construct, where the Central Intelligence resided. His weapons officer armed the device that humanity had built for this exact moment. It was a bomb that operated on principles even human scientists did not fully understand. They only knew that it would work. "For Earth," Daniel whispered as he gave the order to fire. For everyone we lost, for everyone we saved, the weapon detonated, and the Harvester command vessel died. Across the galaxy, the remaining Harvester forces went silent. Their ships stopped moving. Their weapons stopped firing. Whatever intelligence had driven them was gone, and without it, they were nothing but empty metal drifting through space. The war was over. Humanity had won. The Peace Summit was held 6 months later on a space station constructed specifically for the occasion. It floated in neutral space between the outer reach and what remained of Concord territory. The surviving Concord ambassadors faced the human delegation across a table that seemed to span more than physical distance. Council leader William Porter had grown older during the war, but his eyes remained sharp and his voice remained steady. He looked at the beings who had once condemned his ancestors to death and felt something he had not expected. Not anger, not triumph. Just a quiet sadness for all the suffering that could have been avoided. "The Harvesters are defeated," he said, "but they were only one threat among many. The galaxy is not the safe place you believed it to be. There are things out there in the darkness between galaxies that you cannot imagine. Some sleep. Some watch. Some are already moving toward us." Ambassador Trellix IV spoke with none of the arrogance that had defined the family name for generations. The war had broken something inside the young Veluxi. The Veluxi acknowledge our errors. We were wrong to expel humanity. We were wrong to fabricate charges against your ancestors. We were wrong to assume we were safe. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid. Similar admissions came from the other surviving species. The Karathi apologized for enforcing the exile with such cruelty. The Netheran apologized for not speaking louder against the injustice. One by one, they acknowledged what had been done and accepted responsibility for it. Only Ambassador Kyrell seemed at peace. The ancient Netheran had lived long enough to see justice delivered in the most unexpected way possible. "What happens now?" Kyrell asked. William considered the question carefully. "That depends on you. We could demand reparations. We could claim your remaining territories. We could take everything you have left, and it would be justified by any measure of fairness." The Concord representatives waited for the punishment they knew they deserved. "But that is not who we are," William continued. We did not survive 200 years in the outer reach by becoming cruel. We survived by becoming better. Better than our circumstances. Better than our enemies. Better than our pain. He stood and looked at each ambassador in turn. We do not want your worlds. We do not want your resources. We have built something greater in the outer reach, and we will continue to build it. What we want is simpler. We want acknowledgement, not apology. You cannot apologize for what was done to our ancestors. But you can acknowledge the truth. Let history record what happened. Let your children know that humanity was exiled unjustly, and that when you faced extinction, we chose to save you anyway. Trellix asked quietly. And then perhaps in time, there can be trade, communication, maybe even friendship. But trust must be rebuilt slowly. We warned you once, and you did not listen. Now you have faced the repercussions of that choice. We hope you have learned. The human delegation departed, and their ships vanished into the depths of space as silently as they had appeared. The Concord species were left to rebuild their shattered civilizations and remember the lessons they had learned at such terrible costs. In schools, across Concord space, the history was finally taught correctly. Children learned about the exile and the silence and the return. They learned that humanity had been cast out and had survived against impossible odds and had chosen mercy when vengeance would have been earned. And somewhere in the outer reach on worlds, the Concord would never see humanity continue to grow. They watched the stars and prepared for the next threat and remembered everything they had endured. They had warned the galaxy once. They had been ignored, and when the repercussions came, they had faced them not with hatred but with strength. That was what it meant to be human.